Gregory Treverton, Professor of the Practice of International Relations and Spatial Sciences at the University of Southern California, joins us. Professor, thanks again, for coming on the show at short notice. Is it possible to predict what the balance of power is going to look like for Syria now? Obviously, we have, a number of major players now, HTS. We have the US-backed Kurds, and we have Turkey as well. But there's also a resurgent ISIS, which the US bombed as rebels were moving in on Damascus. How do you see it playing out?
There's certainly an awful lot of uncertainty. I think Mr. Biden got it right. This is a moment of happiness in one sense. Getting rid of the Assad regime is a good thing, but it certainly does increase the uncertainty in an already very uncertain region. So there are all the imponderables about how the coalition government works. What's the role of HTS, which after all the United States still brands as a terrorist organization, how they will build a coalition, or will they be able to? And then there are the uncertainties about, as you say, the role of ISIS and to some extent of Israel. Israel's already moved into some buffer zones in the Golan Heights and will stay active there, presumably mostly against ISIS. But that's another big factor for uncertainty. So in that sense, I think it's a good moment for Syria, a hopeful moment after a long, brutal dictatorship. But it is, in some ways, adds to the uncertainty in the region. It's probably worth saying that it is probably the case that Israel's military actions against Hezbollah in Lebanon have played a role in this particular outcome, as have Russia's struggles in Ukraine. So my assumption is that at some point in the conversation, both Iran and Russia said to Assad, we really can't help you. You're kind of on your own. And that, I think, does demonstrate how the changed balance of military power and power in the region, how much it has changed.
Professor, talk to us specifically about HTS and its leader, Golani. I mean, given the group's historical ties to al-Qaeda, its current claims of modernization, how optimistic are you that they could form a viable alternative to Assad's rule?
It's a very good question. Yeah, they certainly have professed and in some ways have made a big evolution from their days of working with al-Qaeda. I think it is a big question whether they can put together a coalition with some of the other opposition forces, or whether they will seek to dominate the landscape. And I think we have to say, they are still fundamentally an Islamic group, but not a secular group. And whatever we disliked about Assad, he was at least secular, not Islamic in governance. So it does, I think, add to the uncertainty about exactly what HTS will do, how able it will be to put together a coalition, and exactly how it will fall in the spectrum between more secular governance and more Islamic governance. And then ISIS is always there on the sidelines as another worrisome factor.
Right. Professor, I mean, are Russia and Iran really out of the picture now? We know that both have invested a huge amount of time, a lot of money, building influence and a presence in Syria. Both have, almost simply just walked away. Do they have a relationship, for example, with HTS at all?
It's a good question. I frankly don't know what the state of their relationship with HTS. Obviously, they've reached out. The Russians have reached out to the HTS and others to try and get guarantees that Russian bases in Syria won't be affected. They'll continue to be there. So they're not out of the picture. I think what's happened to both Iran and Russia is that they've had other things going on, big things going on, big effects on them. And therefore, at this point, just basically must have said to Assad, you really are on your own. I don't think this means they're out of the game. It just means that the effects of Israel's campaign against Hezbollah and to some extent against Iran and Russia's difficult war in Ukraine have meant that they really don't have much capacity to do anything very dramatic in the Middle East. So not out of the game. They'll still want to be in the game, but for the moment, not able to do very much.
I mean, it seems that Mr. Trump seems to want to take a hands-off approach when it comes to Syria. But what sort of role do you think the international community could play in determining Syria's future? I mean, should there be support for a negotiated transition, or is the reality too complicated for any outside force to intervene?
No, I think the international community has a real responsibility, maybe even opportunity, since this is a time when lots of things are kind of up for grabs in Syria, and so and there's also concern, as Mr. Biden also expressed, about the state of allies, Jordan, others, Israel. So that, I think, does mean should be an opportunity for some important international statecraft. And I think I agree with your correspondent that whether he likes it or not, Trump is not going to be able to stay away. There's just too much at stake, too much opportunity, too much risk of bad outcomes. So I think whether he likes it or not, Mr. Trump is going to have to pay considerable attention to Syria. And I hope that attention is one that joins with allies to see if the international community can make of this great opportunity something really decent for Syria and for Syrians.
All right, Professor Treverton, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for joining us this morning. Gregory Treverton, professor of the practice of international relations and spatial sciences at the University of Southern California.